What's up, y'all? You're listening to the System Impacted Podcast, powered by STEM Ops. STEM Ops, which stands for STEM Opportunities in Prison Settings, is an alliance of higher education partner organizations committed to ensuring that STEM preparation during and post-incarceration is commonplace and successful. For this episode, we learn about energy and environmental justice with Operation Fuel's Executive Director, Brenda Watson, who is elevating awareness as well as challenging the structural causes of home energy affordability. Watson's professional career spans 20 years in the areas of energy affordability, transportation planning, municipal government, and community organizing. The health and financial burdens that low-income communities and communities of color face when it comes to energy consumption is indeed a societal issue, not one that is specific to that community. It is up to lawmakers and people, no matter where they land in the social strata, to make informed, sound policy and advocacy decisions that improve the lives of those who are disadvantaged if our goal is to move toward a more just society. There is so much to learn here, so let's get into it. What's going on, everybody? It's the System Impacted Podcast. I'm your host, Terrell Blunt, and my co-host,
Christopher Etienne. I'm happy to be here. Now, I can't wait to dive into this topic today. This is something of extreme importance that we rarely get to talk about. So, Terrell, would you please introduce our guest speaker?
Just a guest, man, just a guest, but a very, very powerful guest, a very inspirational leader that is doing a lot of that work to change people's lives. I am speaking about the executive director of Operation Fuel in Connecticut, Miss Brenda Watson. How are you doing today?
Wow, I'm doing great, but that was quite an introduction. I hope that I can live up to that. Thank you very much.
I'm sure you will. You are amazing in the times that I've seen you speak and just talk about the issues that your organization address and how, again, you're changing people's lives in your respective state of Connecticut. And if we can just start off, like, tell the people who you are, the work that you lead, and what got you into this work.
Sure. Before I do that, I can't overstate enough how successful this organization is because of the team that's here. I certainly don't do this work alone. And with the staff here who are all dedicated to our mission, that's the reason why we're so successful. I have been doing nonprofit and municipal government work for the past 20 years. I landed here at Operation Fuel 12 years ago. The mission of the organization is to ensure equitable access to affordable energy. And we do that by providing direct bill payment assistance to folks who are struggling with their home energy bills. And we just recently launched a program called the Better Homes and Buildings Program. And for that program, what we're doing is assisting homeowners and renters with infrastructure improvements within the building that they live in or household that they live in. So we're remediating the health and safety barriers that exist that prevent those folks from being able to get into the weatherization pipeline. And I'll talk about weatherization in a few minutes and define that for the listeners later, because not everybody knows what weatherization is. The energy sector itself, it's much like the work that you all do, and where I'm learning how to change my mind and the use of language that I'm used to hearing as it relates to people who are impacted by the system, moving away from those terms. So it's a new language, and the energy sector is very similar. It's like learning a whole new language. The acronyms list, Terrell, I sent you a copy of that. It's one of those things where it continues to evolve. And if you're new to this work, it can be quite intimidating.
I definitely have to agree with you. Just prepping for this interview was a process. There's so much terms that I was unfamiliar with that I kind of known that we're facing these type of insecurities, we're facing these type of disparities, but I never understood the language behind it. In regards to this, I just want to kind of start us off by placing things into perspective. One of the things I would like for you to do, Brenda, is define energy justice for us and tell us, why is it important and how does it affect underserved communities?
So sure, defining energy justice, before I do that, I have to first define energy burden, which is the percentage of household income spent on energy. So anything above 6% of one's overall annual income spent on energy bills is considered unaffordable, which creates an energy burden. So the energy affordability gap quantifies the space that exists between what one's bill should be and what it actually is. So similar to the housing calculator that notes your rent or mortgage should not exceed 30% of your income, the energy gap modeling works in that same way. So again, anything over 6% of one's annual income spent on energy means that your energy is unaffordable. So if your household income is, say, $12,000 a year, and your annual energy bill is $3,000, you have an energy burden of 25%. And when you begin to add up expenses, well, let's just take the 30% for your housing, plus that 25% on home energy, that's 55% of your income out the door already. So you can imagine what sort of burdens that would create for anyone who's struggling with just the cost of basic needs. So energy justice specifically focuses on the ways communities should have a say in shaping their energy futures through policy involvement, as well as ensuring that the policies that we're developing, particularly in this moment of an energy transition, don't have unequitable impacts on the most marginalized communities. That is a quote from Shalonda Baker, who is the Deputy Director at the U.S. Department of Energy. I want to talk a little bit about environmental justice, which embraces the principle that all people and communities are entitled to equal protection of our environmental laws, housing, transportation, energy, food and water security, and health laws. Environmental justice is nothing more than this whole principle that people have the right to a clean, healthy, sustainable environment without regard to race, color, or national origin. And that's a quote from Dr. Robert Ballard, who is known as the father of environmental justice. So for me, it's important to embrace and marry the two concepts as they are very connected, and frame this movement as an energy and environmental justice movement, because the two, again, very closely related. You can't have environmental justice without energy justice, and you can't have energy justice without environmental justice.
Thank you for that. When you were speaking, I was thinking about how those definitions come up in my day-to-day, but then more so like my upbringing. And I always saw, and I'm from Newark, New Jersey, right? I saw lots of homes that prior to the riots were owned by the Jewish community that was in Newark, and their homes really came from like settlers that came over there, right, and built in Newark. They had really large homes. After the riots and white flight happened, Black people began to move into those homes. I'm pretty sure the value of it went down, and that's how we were able to get it. Possibly also people were thriving around that time. But the homes now, over those like 50, 60 years that have gone by, the homes are huge, but they also lack like infrastructure. Because I think like commercial buildings even have to, every like 30 years or something, they have to be like done over, or else they would like crumble, right? And I think homes are the same way, if I'm not mistaken. But I always used to think as an adult now, I'm like, why aren't like people in our community borrowing on their homes to fix them up and then bring the value up in their home? But then as I continue to learn, one, even if I own this home outright, as long as I have a low credit score and my credit is jacked up, there is no going to a bank. I could sit in this house and live here, but I can't even fix my home if I needed to, so that I'm not paying like high energy bills and stuff like that, borrow on this home. And for me, when you were talking about all of these things that encompass energy justice, I just started thinking about like, man, even if you do have something that is called an asset, a home, is still tied to you struggling. You can't pay off your credit if you're paying high energy bills or anything, regarding your house, that if it were improved, that charge or charges would go down. But it's just like a circle of poverty. Does that add up to y'all?
It makes complete sense. It adds up. Sadly, energy policy has worked in tandem with racist systems of the past. The most significant being redlining, forcing Black and Latino communities into under-resourced, environmentally toxic corridors faced with high energy burdens and a poor economic outlook. And then you just, on top of that, put the criminal justice system, on that. It's used as a way to further leave these communities stranded. When you don't have access to decision-making and have access to the power players who do, it makes the situation worse. And the other piece to that is living in the Northeast, we have the oldest housing stock in the country. Here in Connecticut, in our larger cities, about 30 or perhaps even higher than that, about 30% or more of the households were built before the 1960s. So it's very likely that these homes have mold, asbestos, vermiculite, leaky fossil fuel burning equipment or HVAC equipment. So there are no programs that would allow for someone outside of applying for an equity loan. And like you said, Terrell, if you don't have equity in your home or you have bad credit, how are you supposed to access the capital or the liquid cash to make those changes, to make your home not only safe and livable, but marketable? So all of these pieces sadly have worked in conjunction with each other to keep our communities at a disadvantage. So it is important that the effort that we have in the community to push back on energy policy, which has largely hurt Black and Brown communities and Indigenous communities. It's time that we're doing it. It's just not happening as fast as I'd like, but we also need housing policy to catch up. We need to remove barriers to employment, ensuring that people who are returning to their communities from being incarcerated have access to jobs, have that job training while they're incarcerated, and are able to access services and jobs once they return to our communities. So everything that you say makes sense. And it's one of those things where I think for a long time, people never really looked at their energy as a product. I don't think that we kind of look at heat, electricity, and water as a product, but it's been traded on the commodities market for a very long time. When electricity was first established as something that can be delivered to people en masse, the foundation of it was to keep it private, meaning keep it in private industry. But at the same time, the government stepped in with financing, so the sector has benefited from capitalist and socialist models for a very long time. And they've had 100+ year head start on people like us who are waking up to the fact that, okay, our energy is a product, but not only is it a product, it's a basic human need. It's so critical and essential to being able to live a healthy and safe and undisrupted lifestyle that once that's taken away in the conditions that we are living in today, and I'm talking about climate change, people die. Not only do they get injured, but in some cases, people die. And we can point to a number of crises or incidents that have happened where a lot of people have died. I'm talking about what happened in 2021 in the Pacific Northwest. Oregon and the state of Washington faced a heat wave and killed about 600 people. But in addition to killing about 600 people, this heat wave also cooked billions of shellfish right there on the beach, which are critical to our ecosystem, critical to having clean oceans. Shellfish they're delicious, number one, but number two, they serve a purpose. They filter water. And a lot of people are just kind of like, what the heck? But, the utility sector or the energy sector wants to continue to deliver energy to us, unsafe fossil fuel burning energy to us because it's the most affordable, because it's what we've been using for a long time, and push back on renewable and green energy, which could actually save our lives, which can help us live more productively, because natural energy sources are more reliable and right now getting to be as affordable as fossil fuels because customers are demanding it. And we're beginning to see folks who are low and moderate income also demanding access to clean, renewable energy.
Wow. It's there's so much to unpack here. I mean, there's so many different pockets of information that I want to visit. So some of the most vulnerable populations, to energy insecurity are people of color and low income communities. These underserved populations usually lack access to proper education and resources that they need to actually progress in society as a whole. So what I wanted to know, and this is a major question, but if you could unpack it for us, I think that it'd truly help the audience kind of connect the dots. I want to know, how do race, income, and education exacerbate energy insecurity issues?
Yeah, again, going back to redlining and other systematic policies that have been used as tools to keep Black, brown, and poor communities isolated and not be able to access these systems. One of the primary key indicators of poverty is health. And prior to having electricity and water and heat being delivered to us, you were largely on your own to take care of those things. Then it became, over time, something that we have all come to be used to. What we all have in common, despite what station we might be at in life, is when we get home from work or school, the first thing we do is turn the lights on. Or, if you're anything like me, you're microwaving something to eat real quick because you're hungry. So it's an equalizer, but sadly, energy policy has been framed in such a way that where, we are paying into this system, but the difference between Black, brown, indigenous, and poor communities is we also pay for these systems with our body and our health. These facilities, Terrell, you live in Jersey, so I know look at where all these facilities are located, alongside the highway or in major cities. And where do we tend to populate large cities? Along the highways and in the cities. So we pay for these systems with our wallets and with our health. And, STEM education, my side eye comment for the day is, I'm not a fan of STEM or STEAM. The A is for arts. If policymakers really cared about the education of American children, we wouldn't need an additional curriculum centered on math and science and art. So it's important that folks get education, but it's not important or critical to coming into the energy sector. What's critical to fixing the energy insecurity that plagues about 30% of this country and 400,000 households here in Connecticut is caring for your community. And caring for your environment. So what I love about the idea of building or widening the pipeline into the energy sector for employment, especially for our brothers and sisters who are transitioning from the system and coming home to their communities, is to come into this sector, to diversify it, to be a part of this clean energy transition, this clean economy that we're currently living in, but is going to continue to boom over the next 10 years, especially if we keep people like Democrats in office and in power. There's a lot to be said about the Democratic Party, but quite honestly, Build Back Better is doing a lot more for the energy sector than the previous administration, which actually halted a lot of the gains that the sector was making in terms of clean energy. It's important to note that industries in the energy sector will phase out, but new tech and industries and energy sources are now being scaled up due to the demand and due to private sector investment and due to policy. So what I want to emphasize is that this isn't just so much about our client or our built environment, It's about our access to decision making. It's connecting our returning citizens to jobs and folks who are in our communities right now to jobs, and to also encourage that we weigh in on energy policy and decisions, to join local boards and committees, to push our locally elected officials to act on removing barriers to clean jobs, because in some cases there aren't many barriers, but the ones that exist are significant enough. I just learned yesterday that the energy sector employs about 6% of Black and Brown men and women in the state of Connecticut, and that's pretty on par to what's happening nationwide. But there's one particular water company in our state that has the highest number of Black and Brown employees because of where they're located, in proximity to public transportation, in proximity to where people live, et cetera. So for me, it's like, the fossil fuel burning plants are in our communities, but we still don't have access to the energy jobs. So I'm really curious about that. I hope that you invite me back when that report is done so I can share with you all the results. But I'm really interested in learning how we can ensure that the numbers go from 6% to 20% to 30% to 50%. Because like I said, we've been paying with our money and we've been paying with our health and our bodies for too long to prop up these systems.
Agreed, 100%. I think for me, I was really like blown away at just the amount of information that I was like ignorant to, in the sense of like not knowing. I was not aware, from a I guess like a social science lens, how this impacts communities, and even going back to that cycle that I was describing, just the different things that kind of fall under the umbrella of, energy and justice, right? So
Yep.
one of the, or maybe a few questions between the two of us is just kind of defining again some of these things. So one is green energy. What is that specifically, and what populations are usually not able to access green energy?
Yeah, so green or renewable energy is broadly defined as energy that is collected from renewable sources such as wind, sunlight, geothermal, which is underground, water, or hydropower. It's the opposite of where our power, the majority of our power is currently coming from or has come from, which is in the form of fossil fuels like oil and coal, which have to be burned. And when they're burned, release carbon dioxide into the air. So going back to the systemic racism and economic isolation practices that have kept our communities last in line, Black, Brown, Indigenous, and poor communities, we're always last, sadly. It's no surprise that we're not able to access the benefits of a green economy from the products and programs and the jobs that currently exist. So being impoverished has many bad side effects, from health outcomes to our prevention around building wealth. But more importantly, having access to power and decision making. So when we are not at the decision-making table, there is rarely someone going, well, what about equality and what about equity for all? It's important that we change that dynamic, and we are slowly getting there. The pandemic has inspired a shift, but more so, I attribute the shift to a generation of people who grew up when social media was like a teenager. There is a generation of adults who are in the workplace, who are in this workplace here at Operation Fuel, who are challenging their employers to do better. And I love the millennials and the Gen Xers the Gen Zers for doing that, for not just themselves, for their peace of mind in the workplace, but their advocacy for themselves is making life better for everybody. I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And I appreciate you placing this back into perspective, because it's like every time we are speaking about any type of inequities, we always have to bring back socioeconomic status and like back into the conversation, like race and socioeconomic status seem to intersect with so many of these issues that tend to impact underrepresented communities. We were actually speaking the day before about how we have a generation of people that are conscious about these inequities, and how we have like just this movement from younger generations, to go greener and to ensure that everybody has like equitable access to energy and utilities. And so I wanted you to just speak a little bit about what's being done now. I want you to speak about the advances that we have been able to make, and just kind of shout out some of these organizations that are extending these opportunities to people that normally wouldn't have access to them.
Oh, I love that question, because, there are people on the federal level like Shalonda Baker at the Department of Energy. I have to shout out Brenda Mallory too, from Waterbury, Connecticut, who's also in the president's administration. They're at that table right now, sitting there for us, ensuring that 40% of all energy investment comes to our communities by way of projects, programs, and jobs, technical assistance grants, you name it. We have representatives at the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency on the federal side. We also have here in Connecticut a regulatory chairwoman, or Madam Chair, who cares about these issues. She actually opened up a docket in December 2019. She led this process focused around modernizing our energy grid, but the emphasis of that proceeding was on energy affordability and equity. So there are 11 investigations under that particular docket, and all had a emphasis on those two items, energy equity and environmental justice. So, there are things happening now as a result of that proceeding 2 years later, 3 years later, that are coming into play. So Operation Fuel has been engaged as a partner with the Connecticut Green Bank. I have to shout out the Brian Garcia at the Connecticut Green Bank as well, who changed their mission to confront climate change with a environmental justice and equity lens. So a lot of the work that they're doing, which is on the financing and investment side of energy projects and environmental projects, are working to help rebuild our communities. So yeah, going back to our work, we are engaged in a number of those different dockets that were investigated. One is a battery storage program. So we're going to be assisting the Green Bank with ensuring that people that we serve, low and moderate incomes, have access to battery storage, which would minimize a disruption to one's life when the power grid goes down. Battery storage looks like it's a power wall. You might have heard of a Tesla power wall. It looks like a large picture frame in your home. Some of them look like dishwashers. So we're excited about that. And then there's the shared clean energy facilities. So that's if you can just think about having access to solar, but not having your own roof because you live in a multifamily building. Now, folks who live in multifamily buildings will have access to the benefits of solar. So, and there are a number of other ways in which things are improving in terms of how the population that we serve are served in terms of all of these clean and green renewable products that are coming down. And we continue to infiltrate in these spaces so that not only are we at the decision-making table, but that the people that we serve are not last in line. The Going Green movement started probably around 20, 30 years ago, but it never engaged the communities that we come from. There was a woman out of Bronx, New York, Dr. Majora Carter. She's been doing this work in the Bronx for a very long time. I've been following her career because I really admired how she took the community that she was living in, which was horribly polluted, and she actually was instrumental in making it clear that people don't have to move out of their communities. People should not have to move out of their communities to seek cleaner air or access to cleaner water and coffee shops. Like we can do that in our own community. We want that in our own community. Nobody wants to pick up and move 90 minutes away to have a productive life. We love our communities. We just want decision makers to understand that and not continue to dump on our communities. So reliable access to electricity, heat, and water is essential to living a healthy lifestyle, and it's essential to our overall safety. I can recall when our power grid went down over a freak October snowstorm several years ago. And I have to tell you, the number of deaths that resulted from people not necessarily freezing to death, but from people who were making poor decisions as a result of not having heat and electricity, like lighting grills in their garage, misusing generators, just borrowing electricity, just doing all of these things that are dangerous. I can't think of any activity that doesn't require power at some point. Everything from leisure to universal precautions in a hospital setting requires access to at least all three: electricity, heat, and water, or one, So, just if you wanted to go on a hike, you're very likely going to have your smartphone with you so you can not only have that for safety, but to listen to music or to track your movements. And without electricity to charge your phone, it's to the point now where it's a public good in the same way that our military is a public good. When you think about warfare, even the threat to our power grid, I should say, the potential to poison our water en masse, utilities are a public good, just like our military.
How do you get across to your opponents of this idea around access to clean energy and utilities isn't necessarily a social problem, it's more so a personal responsibility? Like, how do you address that? But first, I wanted to get just some clarification around how the solar panels and the battery walls are provided to people.
In terms of ensuring that low and moderate income households have access to clean, green, renewable programs and products, it is a public-private partnership. And I think that's pretty much how our country was built. There was always these private and public cooperation. So in terms of the developers that are making technologies, so like the Tesla Powerwall, there's also Cadenza. Yeah, they are private entities. And what they do is they sell their products to whoever can afford them. And perhaps the pandemic did this. So when the frontline worker is no longer going to work, then that means the frontline worker isn't going to Walmart, isn't going to Target, isn't going to the grocery store, isn't. So I think the pandemic really revealed that folks who are part of that 90% of the population have spending power, indeed have spending power. So when these companies have pretty much made their money by being able to target the top 10% of the population who can afford these products without a thought to their checkbooks, then you kind of peak at that point. So how do we get these services to the everyday consumer? That's where the government piece comes in, the socialism piece comes in. And that's kind of a good thing, because what it does is it forces the state or regulators to work with these companies to figure out a way of how they can continue to make money, but maybe there's subsidies or rebates that customers can access so that they can then buy them. So that's where places like the Green Bank come in, where the Green Bank offers very low interest or zero interest loans to help customers access these programs. It's where organizations like mine come in, where we can walk customers through the process of how to access these programs and products. Because, when you think about solar panels 20 years ago, they were only on a certain segment of home. But if you go down one of our larger cities in Bridgeport, there are some communities where you go down the street and you see solar panels on all of these multifamily buildings. And then you have someone like Donnell Baird out of New York, Brooklyn, who formed a company called Block Power, who his mission is to ensure that 100% of homes are electrified. He wants each home to be a Tesla. Meaning that folks have access to heat pumps, which is an upgraded HVAC system that provides not only heating, but it also provides cooling but in a way that's not making your skin dry, making you, sneeze and cough in the morning. I don't know about you, but when I wake up in the morning, all of that is just caught in my chest. All of the burning of the heat overnight to keep us warm has sadly a negative effect on your body. So even having gas stoves in your home, I have a gas stove, and once I learned that a gas stove impacts your indoor air quality, I hate turning it on now. I mean, I hold my breath when I turn it on, but you can smell the gas. It's one of those things where when you begin to learn about how unhealthy your systems are in your home, you do want to figure out a way in which you can remove it and install a system that would minimize that. But then again, it's how do you prioritize it? If I can't necessarily access cash, the upfront cash, to purchase a $5,000-$6,000 heat pump system, I can't access cash to, well, in terms of solar panels, there are so many programs out there now that you can get a solar panel installed on your home for no money down and just pay your monthly bill. But what if you need a new roof first? You have to prioritize getting your roof replaced. Otherwise, you're going to have folks come out and put those arrays on your roof and then have to take them down because your roof is messed up. So,
Right.
So, there's that. And then there's, okay, I would love battery storage, but right now the units cost anywhere between $12,000 and $20,000. I can go out and get a fossil fuel burning generator for $200, So, but I don't want that. I don't want that loud, messy, gas smelling unit anywhere near my household. But if I'm going to have to use that to keep my refrigerator running so that my food doesn't spoil because the power is out from a storm that knocked out the grid, I don't want my basement flooded, so I got to keep my sump pump going, I'm going to have to turn on the generator. But I would really love a power wall in my house. I'd love solar panels so I can reduce my energy bills significantly. And I would love to have a heat pump in my home so that my skin isn't crazy itchy in the winter. And I don't know about you, but I've never had that issue until recently. So, the older you get, your body starts to deteriorate. And I've had a very tough time this winter season because of itchy, dry skin. And it's debilitating.
Again, as I listen to what you're saying and just thinking about, even outside of the solar panel piece, just taping plastic bags around the windows kept warm air from going out, basically insulating the home. I think I read about that somewhere where cracks anywhere around the house and that allows cold air in the winter then causes people to, of course, turn up their heat or turn on the stove. We do that in a lot of Black households. Turn on the stove and open up the door and just let that kind of heat the home. But all of that, again, plays into, using up your energy bill when really the solution is, just making those proper updates to the home so that you don't have to use the stove as much, or by even blocking off the windows and the doors and cracks and stuff like that, you're using less energy. So again, I think it's things that low income communities face that those who are in a financially better position do not. But another thing I would like to gain some insight on this, and this might be going to the side a little bit, Chris. I know we didn't plan this, but I don't know if you recall, were you following that situation that happened, I think at the top of 2021 in Texas, where energy went out or something like that, and people's homes began to flood, I believe. They were either freezing in some videos I saw on TikTok and stuff, but then also I think pipes were busting and water was just running all throughout people's homes and homes were flooded. What exactly happened there, if in fact it is tied to, energy? If there's nothing there, then, we can move on. But it just sound, I don't know, it sounded like it was along those lines.
Oh, there's a lot there. So you're talking about the power outages that occurred in Texas in winter of 2021. Right. It was a confluence of really bad weather due to climate change. Climate change is causing these human-caused natural disasters to be much stronger and more frequent. So where that was a rare occurrence, it was also a really good example of how bad policy decisions are putting everyday people at risk. I'm talking about ignoring infrastructure needs and not investing in that, not embracing clean energy, and the lack of federal oversight. Texas doesn't have a FERC. FERC is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So when you have all of those things kind of working together, situations like what happened in Texas are likely to occur. I think it was the first time it happened, but I don't know if it'll be the last. We had a similar situation here in Connecticut, a freak winter snowstorm that occurred in October of 2011 knocked out the power for a good majority of north central Connecticut. And that impacted everybody, despite their income scale. Like I said before, having electricity and heat and water is an equalizer. So it happened to people who are traditionally not used to not having resources, not used to living in those conditions. And it was a wake-up call. And that was the start of our regulatory body taking a look at how the utility companies are operating, because everyone's paying their bills. And even when the power is out, you still have to pay. So that's one thing. The other piece that I want to touch on is weatherization. It's a process of which a well-trained vendor, licensed vendor, will come into your home, do a blow-a-door test to identify where the leaks are in your home, whether it be windows or your front or your back door, or any door that exits to the outside. What they'll do is they'll come in, replace your light bulbs, replace your shower heads and other things like that. Oh, and the other piece around weatherization is that it can actually reduce your energy usage by up to 20% annually. So it's one of the easiest ways to help people with their energy burden. But what occurs here in Connecticut and probably in Jersey as well is that 30% of the homes in the weatherization pipeline can't get access to weatherization because they have health and safety issues in a home, such as mold, asbestos, vermiculite, and the leaky HVAC systems that I also referred to. So if you don't have the upfront cash to remediate those issues, which can cost you up to $30,000, then you're stuck. You're stuck with a home that's really not that safe, and you can't even install the measures that would help reduce your energy burden. So you have to have money to save money. And that's the reason why higher income households have access to these programs, because they, like I said, can, without a thought, just write that check, get access to those products, get access to the weatherization. So, Operation Fuel is filling that gap for people. We're funding projects up to $25,000 with the hopes of being able to install a heat pump so that we help people with the environmental piece, but the energy burden reducing piece as well. And that's what I mean by these pieces being connected. Energy justice and environmental justice, they are a couple that they should be married. These things happen together.
And I've seen that you touched on so many different social issues. You spoke about several vulnerable populations. So now I want to step away and speak about the justice impacted and the currently incarcerated. Because we know when we're speaking about vulnerable populations, some of the people who suffer from the most severe forms of poverty are people who are incarcerated. And also when you speak about educational disparity, they overly represent this population of people as well. I want you to just highlight ways that green energy can actually be used to uplift the incarcerated community, not just help them increase the sustainability of their community, but actually grant them access to some type of economic empowerment.
Being able to ensure that people who are currently incarcerated and are returning to their communities, where it's highly likely that they are returning to communities that are defined as frontline or environmental justice defined communities, I believe is not only a pathway to reentry, but it's a pathway and a setup for a just energy transition, moving away from fossil fuels to clean energy and environmental justice defined communities. Not only do we build a workforce, we also build up our communities to be free of noxious facilities. We make our energy grid more reliable, all while developing and training our returning brothers and sisters into, energy and environmental stewards. Meaning, I can't think of anyone, especially in my generation, I'm Gen X, who didn't play outside and who didn't, enjoy that. So if we're going to welcome folks back to our communities, we not only need to give them the jobs and resources they need to thrive, but what we end up doing on the other side of that is creating a whole new generation of environmental stewards, people who are going to gain the confidence and the knowledge that they need to sit at some of these decision-making tables and say, I come from this community and I've heard all of you all speak about this next new thing that's coming down, but I did not hear you all say anything about equity. I didn't hear you mention anything about ensuring that we hire from within the community. I didn't hear any of that. So that's why I love the idea of programs that currently exist that are doing that. There's a program in California that works by building a curriculum for people who are incarcerated so that they get that environmental and energy language while they're currently in the system. And then there's a program in Vermont that trains women, gives women who are incarcerated the hands-on job training that they need so that when they return to their communities, not only do they qualify for some of these jobs, but they're also getting the support and they have that language built into them so they can go to a job interview, being able to speak the language. Here in Connecticut, there is a ban, the Box Law on private and public employment, written into law in 2017. So employers are not allowed to ask applicants about changes or convictions. And there's also a ban on employers from denying jobs to people based on their credit scores. So we need more of that. We need more of these wraparound services that not only remove barriers, but also prepare people to come back into the workforce or to start in the workforce. What I also love about the energy sector and the potential that it has for people who don't have formal education is that you can start from the ground with no education, no formal education. And there are quite a few contractors who are Black or Brown owned who see themselves in many applicants and want to offer opportunities, not only because they want to offer the opportunity because they see themselves, but because there is a workforce shortage. And sadly, the policies that were working to keep people isolated have worked against the entire country. Now we're at a point where we have to do things like STEM. We have to do things like workforce development. We have to put money back into the system to push back on these policies that were created largely by states in the first place to keep people isolated and out of the workforce. So it's kind of sad when you think about it, but we're finally beginning to be able to convince decision makers that sadly, you all have had kind of the wrong thing in mind. You continue to support these systems that are hurting everybody, not just the people that you felt you wanted to hurt. It's hurting the entire country.
You spoke about this intersection between the energy burden map and the redlining map. And I want you to just kind of place that into perspective for the audience. How do they intersect and how do they impact one another?
If you were to take a map of, let's say, the city of Hartford or Newark, a redlining map, you could also then take a map of energy burden and overlay the two. And it's very likely that the darker areas of that map are all in the same region. Large cities, densely populated cities where Black and Brown or Indigenous people or poor people live. These communities have been left behind. They've been left under-resourced, and large white-led environmental groups have also played a role in causing some of our communities harm. because they push back on these facilities being where they live. So they have to go somewhere. Folks like the father of environmental justice, Dr. Robert Ballard, his whole mission is saying, we don't want these facilities anywhere. It's madness to think about people like us saying, we don't want you in our community, but it's okay to go into the suburb. That's madness. Air is not isolated. We have winds that carry sands from the coast of Africa to the coast of California. So environmental justice means ensuring that we move away from fossil fuels to clean energy so that these facilities don't have a place anywhere. So I used to be a transportation planner, and when we would design a four-way intersection to make it safe for people who had vision impairments or were hard of hearing, what we ended up doing by ensuring that, there's a tactile warning strip on the sidewalk before you get to the street, very loud crossing sounds to make folks know that it's time to cross, putting a timer on the crosswalk, all of those measures plus more make it safe for people who are living with disabilities, but we make it that much more safer for people who are pushing strollers, and for people who are able-bodied to cross the road, because now they have all these enhancements that make it safe for them to cross. So that's what environmental justice is. That's what energy justice is. When we advocate for ourselves, we end up everything better for everybody. And that's just like what millennials and Gen Z folks have done, is by advocating for themselves, they ended up creating a movement that has been better for everybody in terms of workplace policy and culture.
I think that people forget that when we take care of the least amongst us, we improve humanity as a whole. And so
Right.
Whenever people hear things like, oh, green energy, they're like, oh, you're just focusing on the impoverished communities. We're talking about environmental justice, or you're just focusing on, the fence line communities or whatever. Like, no, we're focusing on everybody. Just improving these systems itself will make the world a better place. And so I just had to comment on you just putting all of that together.
It's like by caring for and coming up with solutions for those who do not have, it seems like that's the primary approach, right? So
Yes.
Then the companies say, okay, we won't build these things here. We'll just go over to the suburbs where it's less people, or rural areas where it's less people. And it's like, nah, you're not going to go there either. Because what happens over there will still impact not only us, like you said, with the winds and stuff, but it's also going to hurt the people that's in close proximity there. And
Right.
It's like, oh, well, where can we go? And it's like, right, that's the point.
Right.
It should not exist. We got to come up with better ways to
Right.
produce what we need without harming people with their bodies or with their pocket. Thank you so much, listeners, for tuning in to another episode of the System Impacted Podcast. And thank you to our guest, Brenda Watson, Executive Director of Operation Fuel. Great conversation on energy and environmental justice. If you want to learn more about Operation Fuel, you can search them on the web, operationfuel.org. The System Impacted Podcast is powered by STEM Ops. Don't forget to visit stem-ops.org. That's STEM-OPS.org to learn more about the project and its partners, and check out resources regarding STEM and the criminal legal system.